At 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 on the West Coast, we are live. Welcome, adventurers. I'm your guide, McZoo, and this is the Reptile Show Reporter. Buckle up because it's time to start this adventure. All right, that was really quick. I don't know. As usual, Bill Strand, the headmaster of the Chameleon Academy, is here. We're expecting Jon Hill from iPardalis. Apparently, I need to call him Jonathan at this point not because he asked me to, because that's what he said when he gets called when he's in trouble. So he's a little late to the party. So we'll call him that tonight when he gets on.
Hey, Howard.
All right, let's start the chat. Let's see, where is it at here?
Mikey Ben, hello.
There we go. There's a chat. So, all right. So I even gave myself a reminder. Mikey Ben is here. And Stephanie Payne
made it at the beginning of the show.
Yeah, I don't know. She's maybe on the wrong time zone somewhere. Got to an earlier time zone, although I think that would be further east and into the water. But nonetheless, or she's in Canada somewhere, or it's up north, I guess. She's from somewhere like New Jersey, right?
New Jersey.
Yes. Okay. All right. So we're waiting for our honored guest to get here. Bill, any announcements?
Other than that, having an absolute blast doing the 3D printing class. Mikey Ben is there. And so next class, we're going to be doing about designing in 3D space. But it's a lot of fun. So let's see. Other than that, no, just regular podcast coming out on Friday about how to read care sheets on the Panther Chameleon podcast. And that's about it going on. What's going on in my life?
All right. Two Turtle Tom is here. Said hello. I got Steph Payne. It's a super moon tonight, so very rare indeed. All right. Okay. John's here, but I don't think I'll let him in and I'll see what happens. That's his. I'm going to switch this over so we're on the right sides here, Bill. I'm on the right side of my video screen. So, Jonathan, are you here for us, or are you just a dark screen?
I can hear you, but
really?
let me see what's going on with that video.
It's on the witness protection program, John.
Since last night when I was talking to him on a podcast. All right, COVID.
Oh,
I'm taking a break off early. All right. Well, that's
COVID.
That's not good. All right. Let's see. All right. So we're just talking about announcements and everything. So podcast number 5 is now live. Podcast number 7 will be John. But I'm going to be calling him Jonathan because he's late and you can't see him for the rest of the show. You can find out why on the podcast. Oh, there he is. All right, there he is. So I'll stop calling him Jonathan. All right. Social media pillars 1 through 4 are moving. I'm doing them both on Instagram and hey, how are you?
So that's my daughter Harper joined us. So
live we have dogs barking. We have all kinds of stuff in the background. Except my wife took them outside. So they're on both the Instagram and on Facebook. I do them both, and I try to do them a little different on each venue. So I don't have them connected. All right. And other than that, the podcasts are on Spotify, Apple, Audible, iHeartRadio, and now YouTube. I've remembered to put the first 5 on YouTube recently. That was last week before that. So, hey, Steve is here. All right. Hi, Steve. All right. So, John, first question. How would you define yourself? I know I asked you this last night. I'm giving you a second opportunity to define yourself with a little bit of time.
I mean, it's not an easy question. I currently am probably defined as a panther chameleon breeder in the hobby. I also enjoy coding and data science. That's my full-time job. So I'm also defined by that.
Okay.
So yeah, the two.
You're a parent, right? Because there's a child behind you.
father of 2 young children.
Okay.
My one of my daughters just started going to school this week, so It's a big
Wow.
week for us.
That's a big step. Yes. Just wait
Yeah.
till they go off to college. That's a bigger step. My last one is going to be in college next year. So with
Oh,
5 of
nice.
those, it's been a long trip, but it gets easier each time they go away. So, but they never go away completely. They're still back here from time to time.
Hmm.
All right. So let's talk about some other stuff than what we talked about last night because we don't want to spoil the podcast for people. But we did talk a little bit about reptile shows. What would you say is an ideal reptile show?
An ideal reptile show?
Mm.
I think the ideal reptile show has ample opportunity to socialize, to educate, and to learn, um, so that you, as like, if you're attending the show,
Mhm.
you get quality time with vendors, and as a vendor, you don't feel like you need to push someone along in order to talk to the next person in line.
Mhm.
And so I think there's like a sweet spot where you constantly have some good conversation going,
Mhm.
and continue to have people coming to your table and things like that. And then there's a place where it's like it's just too crowded and you feel overwhelmed and you're not able to have those good interactions. And then obviously the like quality of the product and everything else like that. I think that's a huge piece, because
Mhm.
if I've been to shows where it's kind of, it's a little uncomfortable because the quality is so low as you're walking through certain sections of the show, that it's just like, hi, like this is not, it's not something that I'm particularly interested in. And so I think that keeping the quality up so that everyone is engaged and is really enjoying the experience, that I think that's important too.
Okay. Do you vend at reptile shows? How many of them, and how often do you vend?
It's been a while. I used to do more. So
Mhm.
before the pandemic, I think from like 2017 to 2019,
Mhm.
that during those years I vended, probably about 10 a year.
Mhm.
But ever since then I haven't done much.
Okay.
Um, so
Tell us about the shows by you. How frequent are they? How large are they? What are they like?
so there's a Repticon in Baltimore that's a quarterly show.
Mhm.
Um, there's there's a that show is a decent size. I'd say it's comparable to um, some of the decent sized ones in Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
Um, the largest ones around here is probably like Battlefield, in Hamburg. Obviously, those are the two biggest shows around me. But
Mhm.
there's also Repticon Baltimore. There's the Four States. I think it's Four States show, which is between Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
Um, there's a Northern Virginia show. There's a Frederick show. So and those ones are all smaller venues.
Mhm.
Um, and I enjoy those because they're usually they're not as highly attended. Because you can talk to people forever, and you get to meet people. Like, I always end up getting to know the vendors really well too. Like, I end up exchanging stuff with the guy next to me, because we get to know each other pretty well. So those shows have that kind of a feel. It's like a smaller venue, not as rushed, pretty casual.
Okay, just to interrupt, Inspector Gadget's here, and so is James Cross, who's a little late to the party, even later than John is. So, but we're gonna call him John from
Hey,
now
hey,
on.
hey.
He's no longer in trouble. No, actually, to be honest, I really appreciate it. He did a podcast with me last night, and we spent an hour, 2.5, 2 hours, and he's doing this live today. So I'm taking up most of his free time this week because we were just talking about how neither of us have that much free time. So I really do appreciate you being here and what have
Yeah,
you.
and I enjoy it. So,
Bill, what are your thoughts about his perfect um, or his ideal show?
His ideal show. Well, I have thoughts about how he sets up a booth. And one thing about Jon that I appreciate is that he sets it up to be a good example for the people walking by. And so his cages tend to be well planted to the point where you can hardly see the chameleon. And so he's put the presentation and responsibility of being a visible member of the community above being a salesperson. And so that is significant. And the question I would have is, Jon, does doing that filter out impulse buyers?
Yes,
It
does.
forces them to say, hey, wait a minute, what's going on? Instead of just,
yeah. And it helps them answer certain questions that they should be forced to answer. Like, can I keep a plant alive? Do I want to get all this equipment? You know, if it's right there in front of them while you're having the conversation, rather than just a dish with an animal in it, you know, I feel like you can, it's very easy to have those conversations. You're not trying to like point at something or like pull it up on your phone or like whatever it is when you do try to educate people if you don't have it there. So I think I find it just
say, this is what it should look like, not what I'm doing.
Yeah, don't do this, do this, you know, like it's much more convenient to just be like, this is it right here. This is the light, and this is a plant that has worked really well for me. And you know, that I think it's useful in many different ways, and it provides a practical educational experience for the buyer, so that you feel more comfortable with it, versus you like, did they really understand what I just said? And they walk off with an animal, you know? So, yeah.
So what are your experiences as far as how many people do stop and say, and ask for more information?
By like usually I get to the point where they are, I realize that I've exceeded their demand for information, and then they're leaving me, and I'm like, no, stay. And you know, so I don't usually have the other way around. Sometimes that happens, but that's just my personality. But like I definitely reach that. I saturate their demand pretty quickly, versus the other way around.
So just to announce, Liz Ann is here as well. She was a little late, but I think that's all how we got to the party tonight. Almost everybody was a little late. I was later getting on than I usually am. I used to get on at 1:45, and I wasn't here. So, but we do have a question from Inspector Gadget. What size enclosures do you display your 3-month-old chameleons at a reptile show?
At a reptile show?
Mm-hmm.
So I've been using smalls, like Reptibreeze smalls, with a raised bed that fills the base, and then plant that and bring that. So
now, when you
it's
say
not
smalls, what size?
So that's I think it's like,
well, the small is a 16 by 16 by 20.
Yeah, 16 by 16 by 20.
Okay.
And the reason is, for a 3-month-old, I can do 8 per table with 2 rows, or like 2 levels. So I can get those on one table. If I were doing older chameleons, I would have a larger enclosure for sure. And I have brought older chameleons, and then I just have a larger enclosure, like a large, not an extra large, but a large.
Okay.
And you say you've got these things planted, and you bring them there all filled up and planted and bioactive and what have you?
Yeah, I've done it 2 ways. I've done it fully bioactive with isopods and everything going in the bottom. And I've done it where it's potted plants. And that really just depends on how much time I have to prepare, like, and like what's available, you know. So I've done it both ways.
I used to bring potted plants, but people kept asking about buying.
They
the
just
plant.
take the plant from you and you
Yeah.
leave you with the chameleon.
Yeah, well, they would at least buy them. So, I made a lot of money off plants, not a ton of money, but I doubled or tripled the price that I paid for them because I got a real good supplier down the road for me. But nothing.
And you do find a lot of people who will be like, "Can I get the whole thing? Can I get the chameleons and the plant and the enclosure?" And that is something that you should be prepared for if you do that. Like people might just want to take the whole thing. And you might want to consider offering it, right? If that's what your strategy is. So
yeah, when I went to shows with my Dragon Strand chameleon caging, all my display models would be gone.
Yeah,
I'd say pick them up
Take
at the end of the show, and they'd all be gone.
That's cool. Yeah, I think that's a good strategy. So,
see, Eliza Ann has a question.
All right. So how do you travel to the show if you're doing a bioactive setup?
Well, I would just put all the seats down in my car, and it just the whole back is just filled with cages. Yeah. That's part of why I can't do some of the largest ones, because if you lay those down, then
everything's a mess. Right.
Yeah, that's not going to work. So if it's fully planted bioactive, it's the ones that can fit in my car basically is the limitation that I have, and I don't have a truck. So
okay. All right. So let's see, lost my place. We had talked about some models of shows last night, where we try to get people interested, but people that are serious. We talked about a show that's kind of more like a zoo, where you got all these people coming through, and it's good for kids, and you get to see all these different animals. But it's probably better to take them to a zoo, because at these places you can buy the animals, and they're not being displayed very well, and you don't have the right idea to do stuff. You don't learn that much. But you also talked about some of the models where there was a greater price for the shows, and which I know, Bill, you'll have to ignore the prices because California dollars are worth a lot less than they are out here in the Pennsylvania, Ohio area. But and you have to pay for parking out there. I have never paid for parking.
Well, of course.
Yet, so.
Oh no.
No, $20 for parking.
Yeah, that's out of our price range.
I got the whole family in for $20 and no part pay for parking. So yeah.
Well, I got the whole family into the parking garage for $20.
All right. And everyone enjoyed the parking garage. Okay. Excellent.
Yeah.
Here, kids, guard the car. I'll be back.
Yeah, but I what we were talking about last night though was that there's a couple of new shows out this way where they purposely have raised the price, and they purposely have fewer vendors with more educational material, really high quality is the goal. And they're also purposely trying to not have too many people attending, right? They're increasing the price to keep the volume where, if you pay that price, you're going to have time with the vendors. So it's just kind of a different mentality.
That's an interesting approach. I like that.
Yeah. So when I saw that this year, I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. I would want to participate in that, because I do find myself in almost every size show. That's what I'm there for. It's like, you're there for the conversations, you're there for high quality interactions. And so they're trying out a couple of different models to try to facilitate that.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I'm losing my place here. Why I wrote all the stuff down, but I'm doing it out of order, so that but this is live, so I can't cut this in post. I can cut it and replay it, but we've got a lot of people on here watching. So
I'll ask how many people who come to buy from you at a show come specifically because they know they're going to meet you, and how many of them just walk by and say, who are you?
I think if I did a show now, I might get more. But when I did shows in 2017, I was a nobody, right?
Yeah.
So very few people walked in the door looking for me.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
that I don't think anyone did. And I'll tell you, the first show that I vended in Pennsylvania, Frank Payne came to my table and we talked for 10 minutes before I figured out who he was. And when I did, I was then starstruck and like kind of bottled up, but we had been talking for like 10 minutes. And he was, he complimented my setup, um, and that's when we met for the first time.
Okay.
But yeah, I didn't have many people who knew who I was when I was attending shows.
Okay.
I think I created my Facebook page maybe like 2018 or something, and I'd already been doing shows in 2017. So
Okay. Yeah, I
So you're
found.
breeding panthers. What else are you up to currently?
I have a small breeding project with northern Mexican pine snakes.
Mhm.
It's my favorite large-bodied colobrid. Um, they have great personalities, and I love um, the pattern varies from the head to the tail, and they're just a very unique species. So I decided to get to have a project with them.
How long have you been doing that?
Probably 6 years now. I think
Wow.
my first pair is 6 years old, and I've got my second clutch incubating. It's a lot slower paced project, um, and the type of people that contact you about it, like it's a different thing, because if someone's saying, "Hey, you have northern Mexican pine snakes," and I've been looking for them, they've been really searching, and by the time they find you, it's a different type of conversation, which is, in some ways I enjoy that, but because there's not as much availability of that species. It's not like ball pythons or crested geckos or panther chameleons. Um, there aren't as many breeders.
So what's their enclosure like?
I have my adult pairs. Each of them have 4 foot by 4 foot by 2 foot. I've been adding UVB and experimenting with different plants that they won't destroy. But they like they crush everything I put in there. So they're a challenge to have like live things. And they also like to dig, which
Mhm.
is, so even if even if they don't crush it, they'll dig it up and you'll like find it upside down. And it's kind of interesting because before I had kept them in pine, like a normal different types of bedding, and it was pretty standard snake colobrid enclosure, because I started keeping colobrids when before I was 10, right? So I've gone from the rack, like the rack and some of the most simplistic enclosures, and then tried to do some more advanced stuff with the northern Mexican pines, in larger enclosures and with natural lighting and live plants. And they're a different beast than chameleons, because they like to dig, and it's cool because I didn't know that until I put them in an enclosure with a good foot of substrate, and then I started to see all these different behaviors that were, it was like, oh, you guys dig, like, oh gosh. And they'll make these tunnels, and it's kind of interesting. I've never seen a snake dig before I put them in these enclosures, but they kind of shovel things around with their head, and it's pretty cool.
How big do they
So,
get? How many feet?
um the average is about 8-9 feet,
Mhm.
um at when they're full grown, which
Mhm.
takes about 7 to 10 years.
Mhm.
Um, so they're a slower growing species. They're from a mountainous region in Mexico, and so they do really well at room temperature, like 70 to 75.
Mhm.
But they don't do well if you get into the 80s. So you do not want to give them basking. You actually just want to keep them nice and cool. You don't feed them as much. They only eat once every 12 to 18 days. You really don't want to be feeding them any more frequent than that, because their metabolism is slower. They grow slower. But they're also one of these species where they're amazing once they're full grown. So after 10 years of investment, you have a beautiful snake. But most species are the opposite. They're beautiful for like the first 6 months to a year, and then the rest of their life for like 30 years they're ugly. And I like the reverse, where you get it long-term investment, but once you get there, they're beautiful and really enjoyable species.
Well, what is it that got you involved? I mean, snake wise, other than emerald tree boas, they all kind of look alike, right? So
Hey now, hey.
Bill's a chameleon guy, and he calls all the other reptiles lesser reptiles. So everybody just ignore him for that comment. We'll just kind of move on.
I'll show you some pictures of northern Mexican pines. They're pretty cool.
We'll have to start calling him William because now he's in trouble.
Yeah.
Go to the crowd. We have a question.
All right. So we'll get away from the snakes and we'll talk about minors.
Oh, yeah. So
we're talking about Crucifer minors, which is a chameleon, correct? I think that's what she's asking, and I know that's the right answer.
Yes.
Eliza Ann is a chameleon person.
Yeah, lesser chameleons, first fair minor. So this past year, I did get better results with that project, but it still is one that I don't feel 100% comfortable with as far as like consistent production. And I want to see more natural behaviors from them on a consistent basis, like eagerness to breed and consistent laying, get them in a good cycle and things like that. And I haven't gotten there, even though I've spent years on it. And last year I tested out different humidity cycles, light cycles, and that seemed to help by varying those by season. And I'm going to continue to try to improve and talk to others who have had success, like Frank Payne and Kevin Stanford. But it's one where there's not that much from a genetics standpoint in the United States. There's only a few lines, and I don't know anybody who's currently having a ton of success with them.
That's sad.
Yeah, I mean, they're a wonderful species. I really enjoy the animals that I have, but yeah, that's.
I think
Frank,
we're just lucky that they came in and the right people got involved with it, and so we have a fighting chance of continuing it.
Yeah,
I mean that I will forever respect Frank Payne for how he handled First for Minor, and he is the one who has been responsible for giving all of us a chance to have it. So
exactly.
Yep. I'm very much a fan of people who think about the community and the community good, and in that action, he just shone through. It was amazing.
Yeah, he really was the reason that they are here now. Yeah. So before it was Carl, and then Frank, and yeah, it's
all right. Back to the snakes. Someone on Facebook, we don't know who they are because Facebook keeps them secret. Brazilian rainbow boys are gorgeous. I agree.
Fine, yeah.
I agree. And I really think that any snake that can have a albino with some purple hues or something like that, I think those are, they come in ball pythons. They now have them in what do you call them? Ball pythons, in boas, and what are the longest snakes?
Retics.
Retics, yeah.
I see some really beautiful retics. Every time I go to a show and I go, what is that snake? It's awesome.
Yeah.
Retic, I'm like, is it a dwarf retic? They're like, no. I'm like,
it's gonna get big.
Yeah. So I'm
I was absolutely kidding. I love snakes, and
in Ohio we can actually own large retics. It's just as soon as they get to 13 feet, you have to register with the state. So that puts all your pets in the, they can come and inspect anytime, anywhere. And so I don't really like that kind of stuff. That's why I don't have turtles that are the red-eared sliders in Ohio have to have a permit. So that's why their shelters are full with them, because everybody sells them at 2 inches and they get full size, and people find out they're not allowed to have them, and they go from there. But anyways, all right, so let's get back to the other stuff. So what's next for you?
Well, I'm currently working on a podcast series with Bill, and it's a part of the Chameleon Academy network. We're calling it, I guess. I called it a franchise, and he's like, "No, it's not a franchise. It's a network."
The network, huh?
Yeah. But the topic that I'm currently working on is panther chameleon genetics, and I wanted to have this be a deep dive on the topic, kind of starting with basic genetic information, pulling in some academics, hopefully a couple professors, then to talk about, well, what does that mean for us as hobbyists? And from a selective breeding standpoint, from a customer standpoint, like how do you make a good choice based on the genetic information that you now understand? And then to get into revisit the locale conversation, because a lot of the selective breeding and also that selection process and genetics and so forth is affected by locale for panthers. And as you're listening to this, if you think of another genetics related topic that you think I should cover, I'm totally game. So let me know, and I'd be happy to find a way to work it in.
Great, that's awesome. So we talked about that on the podcast. By the way, his podcast that is second in line, so he's going to be number 7, which will launch in 3 weeks from yesterday. So give me a little time to. I've got one in front of him. It's almost done editing. It's going to launch on Tuesday, and then I do every other Tuesday, every second and fourth Tuesday. I guess it really is. I'm not doing every other, but actually, I think I've been doing every other. I really intended it to be second and fourth, but I think we're going to end up with every other because I'm getting enough people in. So not to detract from the conversation. So you were part of the Panther locale test. What's going on with that? Or do you not want to talk about that today?
I mean, I'm happy to talk about it. The initial research that was done with the funding that we put together was positive. And it helped us work on the mitochondrial DNA portion of the test. The phase that Benson is working on right now is one where he's taken all the samples that we sent in, the skin samples that we sent in for that initial phase, and he's done full sequences. So I think he now has 70 or 80 full panther genomic sequences, which is crazy to think that is possible. I mean, I remember when the human genome was sequenced for the first time, and I think most people, it's like the speed at which genetic research and tools have advanced is pretty cool. And so Benson is starting with that to try to enhance the accuracy of the test, using some more advanced techniques that you can use once you have the full sequence. And so that will then be the commercial test that he releases. But the cool thing about that commercial test that he releases, that full panel, is what I think is what he calls those, is that it will be able to do more than just locale. It will be able to do like inbreeding coefficient, paternity test. Like you can do all sorts of things with that information. So
wait. How can it do inbreeding coefficient?
There's a way, given just one genome, if you analyze it to this is not you're asking me a question I don't know the answer to, but I know that there's a way to answer that question if you have a full sequence of animal's genome.
Gosh, just the
I think basically with my basic understanding of this issue, it's probably has to do with you've got two parents and what
And
their
if you
genes are like,
see matches, if you see
and
so many matches
that
on,
are identical, then
yeah,
there's a
Them-
inbreeding quotient. But
Yep.
but I'm not sure. I don't know all the specifics either. I have an idea, but boy, I'm pretty far from the truth.
I think that's a great question for Benson on the podcast. So thank you.
And the follow-up question is, how are we in the community going to use that? Because we all assign every wild caught that comes in as pure unrelated, but we all also know that they don't care.
True.
So we may be bringing in some baseline coefficient. And so how would we in the community use that number
and I think you might be like, okay, that number for Ambilobe is on average this, but then for like Nosy B, good luck. It's going to be a different number, like it's, so that I think will be really interesting. So.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We are going to be, the more we do these tests, the more we're entering into a new era of information and abuse of that information and the blowing up of the significance of the information.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, this is going to be a fun one. Glad I'm not a
far
panther breeder.
See, I'm over here like, yes, bring it on. This is my, I love this. Whereas Bill's like, oh no,
chaos.
Another factor to understand, what's the big, but actually, there
will be blood in the streets tonight.
At some point, our axolotl breeder Paris was telling me about inbreeding coefficients and where they're at, so they know them on axolotls. Now, axolotls were things that were taken from the wild. They're no longer in the wild. There was 7 individuals that were from the pet trade that were in labs, not in the pet trade, and they were used because they regenerate. And people were thinking about, how do we make things regenerate? They can regenerate everything. So not fully. You can't cut them in half. And that's the answer to yesterday's question or last week's question. You can't cut them in half and they don't grow back. You get missing limbs, even part of their brain can grow back, but you can't cut them in half and get so they're not like amoebas or what have you. But they know coefficients on the for their breeding. So so it's, and I don't know how they figured out. I don't know if they use genetics or because they know the to the nth degree of when the background, the history of these different things. So because you can't breed them together because you have to be very careful about those because their inbreeding causes all kinds of disease in those because they're somewhat of a lower life form that's closer to amoebas than chameleons and other reptiles. They're amphibians, but and they're also partially salamanders. So because there are no pure axolotls ever on the planet as far as we know. But Bill and I were talking about 10 years in the wild not being present, then they're considered to be extinct in the wild, I guess is the words that people use. But anyways, but yes, that's very interesting and what that's going to be. And how far off is this test? Do we know? Any idea?
Yeah, that's why I want to get Benson onto the podcast. I want to pin him down in a public setting.
So get him online on camera and turn on the lights and sweat it out of him, huh? Okay. Let's
but I mean, he
to hear what's coming. So
yeah, he knows my intention, so it's not a big deal. I try to catch him on the phone. He's really busy ever since he started working with Morph Market, and so I think his timelines just changed.
But that would be a tremendous opportunity to get on something like Morph Market. That's not a small situation.
Exactly. That's where it will be. And because panther chameleons are now a fully supported species on Morph Market, that information will be something that you could tag your breeders with on there and have it be verified by a third party so that people can trust the results, which I think there's a lot of really interesting potential there.
So what will your podcast be called, or haven't you named it yet?
I'm very uncreative. I've been just calling it iPardalis
okay,
podcast.
That's great. That's awesome.
But Yeah, it just also makes it
call
easy
mine
because
the Reptile Show Reporter podcast. I call it my, my Facebook, my Instagram, everything. Even this show is the Reptile Show Reporter. So it's not like, it's our third name. It was Exotic Pet Adventures, and it was unnamed. It was kind of the reptile enthusiasts get to know the people thing. But yeah, it's
Yep. Yeah.
we go through your creations and what have you. And
Yeah,
Generally
at some point I
speaking-
might come up with some. What'd you say, Bill?
Yeah, generally speaking, it's not the name, it's what you do with it. I mean, yeah, there are some names that just you can't recover from, but generally speaking, the name, the meaning and the significance of the name depends upon what you put behind it.
Yeah.
Kind of like the Nova in Mexico, which means no go. The car was Nova. It was real popular here in the United States. They tried to sell it down in Mexico, and Nova means no go. So that was a total disaster. They had to rename it down there. So that was many moons ago. But all right. So we were talking last night after we turned off the cameras, so I missed recording some of the good stuff we talked about. But we talked about having to talk about today. I guess the topic in general is how do hobbyists and people in academia fit together? How should they fit together? Is there a misconception that they're anti each other, or what is your feeling on it?
Yeah, we were when we turned the recording off, we got into how I feel like there's a lot of natural synergy between the nerdier side of herpetoculture and academics who are doing research and conservation work, and we're really very similar. We have very similar interests. I'm out there reading their papers, right? Trying to write blogs for other people to read, and I think that when it comes to conservation work, there are situations where conservationists and academics know that the people who have the skills to keep a species alive in captivity are the best herpetoculturalists. They're specialists who a zoo could only dream of employing, right? And so the fact that we have those people and we know exactly who they are. I had this conversation with one of my customers who is a conservation biologist, and he said, "I'm working on this project in Eastern Africa. There's a pygmy species that we'd really like to try to preserve in captivity because their environment is going to be gone in a matter of years. And we don't trust any of the places that we currently could place these animals. Do you know someone who knows pygmy species really well?" And I'm like, yeah, Michael Nash, Frank Payne, Kevin, and for us, that's second nature. We have those names, like it's quick, right?
Yeah.
And so the more conversations we can have with people who are looking for that knowledge and looking for those skills, looking for those names, that we can connect those people together in a way that it would be pretty difficult for them to ever meet, right? And so the more we can facilitate those interactions, I think that there's a lot of really cool stuff that can happen, because for us it's a bucket list animal. Like it's like, for us it's an absolute dream, and we're going to put every bit of fiber towards that, right? Whereas they couldn't find that type of resource if they tried, right? So I think that that's a pretty unique thing.
Yeah, I've seen this a couple of times where the scientists are working their hardest to identify these animals, give them species designation, raise them up to species designation, get awareness to try to put this animal on the conservation list, so it's got it's visible, and people will conserve it. And then they see all of this isn't working, or at least it's not working in time to save this little patch where this animal lives. And so I've actually seen more and more lately of scientists going to the I'll call it the herpetoculture world, saying, "Hey, can you help us? Because everything we're doing isn't working fast enough, and this animal's just going to disappear."
Exactly. And so there's a lot of I think situations like that where it's not a tension, it's actually a situation where we're all of our interests are aligned, um, and I think if the more of those types of things we focus on, the better off we'll be, because we'll have great examples to speak to, and those are the things we want people to know the hobby by. They want us to know, hey, they had these really unique skills and were able to help with this project, rather than it being like the animal rights story that like gets in the news or whatever. And so that's my perspective on it, is like we could have a lot of these mutually beneficial interactions, and I personally really enjoy that stuff. So that when somebody says, "Hey, there's a really cool paper," I'm going to read it. Like it's not effort. So
That's awesome. We just need to find some academics who want to know more about quadric cornerspell.
yeah.
Because
Well,
those were the ones who didn't get quite in the right hands. So,
in what I've done as far as these podcasts over these last many years, I have found there are the stereotypical scientists that don't want to have anything to do with anything outside of academia, and they're just kind of poo-pooing people on the outside for whatever reason. Either they think, well, they don't want to bother with us, or that we're just too stupid to understand what they're saying.
Well, there's an academic, like in academia, they're trained to be critical thinkers, and in some ways, like just going to a talk and criticizing the person who's speaking is seen as like a productive exercise. Right. And I remember when I was in grad school, and this was all around me with like PhDs doing this stuff. And I had come from a very practical experience in the same field that we were all doing research on. And I had to get over it really fast because it would be just like, mind numbing.
I'll say, and then there's the other side of the scientists that are absolutely grateful for the ability to reach beyond those walls and talk to the community.
Chris Anderson.
Does everybody know that Jan Stapala is a PhD?
Exactly.
Mark Schertz, PhD. Chris Anderson, PhD. These people are in academia, and they are so integrated into our community, we forget that they're bridges. Doctors.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's an incredible bridge, and more people are getting comfortable with talking. I think the whole the explosion, I'll call it an explosion, it's kind of a small explosion, but an explosion of podcasting has made it a little bit more widespread, a little bit more acceptable. People aren't as intimidated, and I think pandemic.
Here we go again. Bill's lighting a match with the podcast phenomenon, that was something we talked about last night. The theme of Bill being the silent hand behind all this stuff. So if you want to hear more about that, catch the podcast in 3 weeks. So once I get it edited,
it's the man behind the scenes.
Yes. But he's actually in the front row as well. So people don't know he's behind the scenes, right?
Hiding in the front row.
Right, exactly. That's the best place to be, because no one really knows that you're there, because they don't see the front row people, because they're not afraid. So okay, all right. Yeah. So we're getting at about 50 minutes, so it's time to wrap this up tonight. Bill, any further questions for John?
Oh no, I've had a grand old time.
Okay, I have one last question for you. Any final words for the adventurers here that spent the last hour with us? Anything you want? Any bit of wisdom you want to spout out? Or
I mean, I like always, if you hear anything that you really enjoy or you have any ideas or thoughts, just private message me. I love to hear from you guys. So
Okay.
whenever
So how
you're
would,
like, hey, there's this topic that we need more information on, even anything like that, it's great.
would you how do you get a hold of you? I guess iPardalis is probably the best place to go. Is that and
Yeah,
you what venues are you on, or what different social
I
medias are you on?
yeah, I mean, iPardalis.com, the icons
Mhm.
on the top of the website are all my
Mhm.
social media accounts. So if you click those
Okay.
icons, you can find the YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, um, even my GitHub if you want to look at the code. Um, that is on the top of the website. I don't know how many people know that, but those icons are the way that you can reach me on any venue. Yeah.
What's your primary one? Which one is the best to reach on, or which one do you look at most?
Uh, I do Facebook and Instagram pretty much equally these
Mhm.
days. So,
Are those more common than your email, or is that
oh, it's more just a frequency thing. Like if you ping me on Instagram and Facebook, it'd be more of an immediate response, whereas email's a sit down thing at night,
Mhm.
right? So you're not going to get as
Not
fast
for
of a
me, but
response.
that's I live in a different world. So email is
Yeah.
like Instagram for me because of the different people that I work with. But
Oh, I
I'm
know.
always
I had to learn with different generations at my work,
Mhm.
because they would get really upset when I didn't respond to emails within like 2 hours, and I'm like, "Well,
2 hours.
Slack me,
I'm like 30 seconds. They'd call.
like, oh yeah, like Slack me. Come on, don't email me if you want that kind of response." So,
Exactly. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone, for being here. Thank you again, John, and as well to my famous co-host, Bill. We'll see you next week.
Bye all.
see you guys.